There's no easy way to ask any of these questions.
There's no easy way to answer.
Fine, so I'm just going to ask it straight out. What were you thinking that day in New York?
No, frankly, I don't remember exactly. It depends if you're talking that day before the event or after the event.
Before the event that led you to the event?
I wasn't thinking anything. It happened, something happened, which is a private thing, and I still say what happens in a room is a private thing unless the prosecutors find something to tell you that you are going to be charged for something and they have proof of that. And when prosecutors, after having charging you, tells, okay, finally we don't have charge enough to charge you, then it means that it's a private thing and nobody has to say anything about it.
So what do you think was Ms. Diallo's motivation for making the accusation?
I don't know. We can imagine several things. I don't know. I don't want to have myself an accusation now, but many hypotheses has been put in the press. I have seen in the press that it could be for money, it could be directed by some secret services. I don't know. I don't know what was really the motivation. The reality is that I have been charged for very, very difficult crimes, and that at the end of the day, the prosecutor, the district attorney in New York, says, okay, there's nothing anymore.
Why did you settle the case against her? Why did you pay her money?
That's very simple. The US is a very special system. In my country, in most European countries, when on the penal side, people say there's nothing, then you cannot be sued on the civil side. In the US, you can. So the prosecutor may say, we have nothing against you, but still you may have a civil trial. And I was ready to go to this trial, but my lawyers told me, okay, it's going to take 4 years, and it's going to cost you much more in legal fees than you have to pay, even if you win, so you better cut off.
Paid her off.
And I decided to settle and go on with my life.
Do you give any credence to the conspiracy theorists that it was your secret services, the missing BlackBerry, whatever it might be, all these things? Do you give any credence to the fact that you were set up?
Credence? Maybe. Proof? No. So I better say nothing.
So you do give some credence? One of the most controversial aspects of this, besides your behaviour, was, of course, the famous perp walk. Mm-hmm. You were brandished in front. This made huge noise in France. How do you now view the perp walk?
I think it's a terrible thing, frankly. Not only because it's difficult to live. There are many things you're difficult to live with, you have to do. The problem is that it's a moment where in all European, American society, you're supposed to be innocent. You're supposed to be innocent until you're convicted. And the perp walk takes place at the moment where you're supposed to be innocent. And so what happens? You're just shown to everybody as if you were a criminal at a moment where nobody knows if it's true or not. Maybe you're a criminal, maybe you're not. But it will be proved later on. And so it's just unfair to put people in that way in front of the rest of the world when you just don't know what they have done.
Did you feel that at the time?
Well, I was angry. Because at this moment I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't understand why I was there. I was just understanding that something was going on that I didn't control.
The problem with all the allegations about you, sir, whether it be the Sofitel incident, or indeed the young lady in France, or indeed the parties, the libertine soirees as they're now known, the problem is that none of them, underneath them all, there's an element of behaviour that is not expected of men or women of high office.
I agree. I agree. So I made this mistake to believe that you could have a public life, doing what you had to do in the public life, and nobody never said against me something in the public life, and that you can have your private life. And my mistake was certainly to believe that you can have these two things together without any connection in between. It was wrong. It was wrong in the way you say, because people are not expecting this kind of heterodox behavior from somebody having a public responsibility.
Were you an accident waiting to happen?
No, I won't say. I won't say that. I had in mind that I had my private life, that I could do what I want, as long as Nobody was hurt or some legal problem appear, but without any kind of legal problem, I could do what I want, as everybody can do what he wants, and that I will be judged on my public service just on what I do in the public. Again, it was the wrong thing. I understand now that you cannot disentangle the two in that way.
As one reads about you, and let's face it, there's mountains out there now. You must have read I don't know whether you read much.
Not that much.
Not much, right. But everyone says you have a problem with women. Dominic Strauss-Kahn clearly has a problem with women in his attitude to them, the way he behaves towards them, the way he views them as sexual objects.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think I have any kind of problem with women. I certainly have a problem with understanding that what is expected from a politician of highest level is different from what can do Mrs. Smith in the street.
That's the price of being at the top.
Exactly. And I didn't want to pay this price. So finally, I paid it twice.
You said that you had missed your rendezvous with the French people, I believe was the phrase. You were going to be a presidential candidate. Was it a case of au revoir or adieu? In other words, are you going to come back again? Everybody wants to know. It's really a basic question, this, isn't it? Do you have aspirations to be president of France?
No. No.
Is that a politician's no, a never, maybe, or perhaps?
It's a no. I'm now working in all the world, around the world for governments, some in developed countries, some in the developed countries, developing countries. They ask me for advice. I'm happy to help. Sometimes I make some money and I need some money to live. Sometimes I don't make some money and I do it for free just because I want to help and I like it. So this problem of French politics is behind me. Many things. First, something which has been already disclosed by the IMF, which is that we, when I say we, I mean the IMF, underestimate what we call the multipliers, which is basically the effect of austerity on growth. So the result was that what has been asked to the Greek in terms of rebalancing their budget had more effect on growth than we expected. But that's not all the story. What is really interesting is that, there was a team called the Troika.
Which the IMF now admits was a poorly constructed way of moving forward.
Exactly. Because maybe you remember, before 2010, or the beginning of 2010, the Europeans didn't want at all to see the IMF coming to Europe. They say, never, you're the devil, we don't want you. So when we came in, we were a junior partner. The other partner were the ECB, the European Central Bank, and the Commission. And we were a junior partner, and we argued for more growth. We were clearly the pro-growth people within this group, but with little success.
Why has the Eurozone crisis been such a failure to solve?
Because they failed to do what, in my view, they had to do. Restructuring.
They?
Yeah, the Europeans, including me as a European, of course. Failing to restructure the debt. Failing to the cleansing of the banking system, and failing also in redistributing wealth. The story is that when you're facing such a disaster, you need to clean up, pay what you have lost, and go ahead.
Are you prepared to say now that they have completely botched the Eurozone crisis?
You're too hard, a little too hard, but I'm not that far from what you say. Frankly, everybody knows in the business side that when you have a loss, you have to take it and start again. What the Europeans tried to do was to buy time for political reason, not to admit the losses, so they were unable, still now they're unable to have a plan for the future. They just try to buy another 6 months and another 6 months. And that's a catastrophe because the cost today is much higher than the cost which would have been the cost 2 or 3 years ago.
And when you see the way they put together the original Cyprus bailing in ordinary depositors.
Very good example. Cyprus is another disaster, as if history had given no lessons. How can you expect that the Cyprus economy, which is such a small economy, will start again when you're just squeezing all the companies, all the firms, keeping all their money out?
So let's be blunt about this. Is this a case of Germany pushing austerity or the hardliners You're a socialist. So is it a case of the hardliners on the right pushing austerity to the absence of anything else?
No, it's not a question of Germany. You have pro-austerity and pro-growth in both countries, in France and Germany, and in other countries too. The problem is that the problem is not a question of austerity or not. It has been too much austerity. I agree with this. And if I were a Greek man, I probably will be demonstrating in the street as others. But the question is not this is not the main question. The question is that more or less austerity, what the economists call the policy mix between fiscal policy and monetary policy, is not the point. The main point is competitiveness. And arguing that you need to have less deficit, less debt, or more debt is an interesting problem. But it's not the main problem. The main problem is that Europe is not competitive anymore.
So what has to happen to make Europe competitive?
Well, you have to work on competitiveness. The history is too long to be said today. But countries like France, like UK, like Germany also have lived for a century or more on the fact that they keep the technology for themselves, lived on the rest of the world. And that's over.
But
so they have to rebuild their competitiveness.
Today's leaders are not up to the task.
Well, I think most of them don't really understand what globalization is. They have been educated, trained, they had their political life in one country and only one country. And they don't realize that Europe is not that big, it's a small part of the world. And the problem is to solve the European problem in the globalization, not against the globalization,
They're not up to it. Come on, Dominic. If we're talking here about a situation where 4 or 5 years, it's nearly 6 years after the crisis began, and Europe is still in recession with high unemployment.
Well, if you want me to tell you that there is a crisis of leadership, I will tell it. It is. You know, some Arabic saying, which is that an army of lions led by a sheep will always be defeated by an army of sheep led by a lion. And that's exactly where we are.
Sheep. We were lions being led by sheep.
I'm afraid that...
the Commission's not up to it.
You can't be that general. Some leaders in Europe are perfectly up to date and know what they would have to do. But mostly the European system is built in a way that no decision is made, no hard decision can be made.
The euro is the classic example of exactly what you're talking about. To continue your analogy, it is the horse built by a committee which becomes a camel.
You can say that. Look at the banking union. It's a bit technical, I don't want to elaborate too much on that.
It'll never happen.
It's not going to happen for years, and we need it, absolutely. But the different elements of the banking union are not on the table, just because most countries don't want. They say in declaration, yeah, blah, blah, okay, European Council will make decision, but then nothing happened in the field. And that's the point. Most decisions which are made by the European leaders are broadcast as big success, but afterwards, nothing. And that's the point. Years after the beginning of the European crisis, we're still there with zero growth or close to zero growth, and it's going to go on for years in the same way, just because the tough decisions are not really implemented.
Are you frustrated that you are not there to be able to have an influence on this crisis?
No, it's my fault.
We're getting to that in a second.
Well, I know that. No, I'm not frustrated. I'm just desperate to see my country and my continent, because Europe is not only a money, a currency, or a market. Money is civilization. Europe is a civilization. And to see this civilization just going around without being able to solve problems, which are small problems. Greece is a small economy, 2% of the Eurozone GDP. Cyprus is just ridiculous. I met sometime an American CEO talking about Europe, and he said, how can they be confident with those guys? How can they be confident with CEOs which are unable to solve a problem of 2% of their turnover? That's exactly the point. I think the situation is very difficult, and I think he's doing his best.
If he can't solve that problems in a French environment, it has to be a European environment. It doesn't bode well, frankly, does it?
Yeah, you need, you know, to solve the problem together, you need to be a team. And the problem is that you don't have the European team.
And you don't even have agreement really between France and Germany.
True, because in my view, I don't want to be pretentious in saying that, but they don't understand that they cannot solve their own problem alone. And that's true for Merkel, it's true for Hollande, it's true for the Italian, it's true for Cameron, it's true for all of them.
Does it worry you that Hollande and Merkel do not get on that well? I mean, they might get on personally, but they're politically, they are not allies.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the only way for Europe to overcome obstacles is to have a great cooperation, and more than cooperation, a great understanding between France and Germany. It happened in the past, sometime, and that was the period where it worked well. It's not the case anymore, and that's certainly a problem.
If we talk about the banks, never mind the subprime crisis that got us into all this mess, good old-fashioned greed, bankers' greed, bonuses. Time to do something about it. Are you more in the Anglo-American approach or the Michel Barnier European approach?
None of them. The Anglo-American approach is hypocritical. The Barnier approach is ineffective, even if Michel Barnier himself is a very good man trying to do his best. But it is an environment which makes things very difficult to really succeed. The point is, it is just unacceptable for most of the people on earth that some others will earn that much money, and on top of that, earning this money will take risks that they won't support themselves, but the rest of the world will have to deal with. So, of course, something has to be done, but it's not just capping the income or something like this. It's much more deep to change the way the financial institutions are working.
In the same way that LIBOR, they managed to defraud LIBOR, they managed to fix LIBOR for many years. Were you horrified by that?
Well, horrified is a bit too strong a word, but well, I'm not sure it's the right way to do things. Look, the banking system in Europe is sick, very sick, much more than people say. It has to be really cleaned up before growth will come back. And because most of the leaders are unable to make this decision, including the question of how much the people, the traders and so on will make, how much money they will make. But that's only a small part of the problem. If you don't solve the problem of the banks in Europe, you won't have growth anymore.
We have two more areas to talk about. Free trade agreement between the EU and the US. It's just getting underway now.
Trade is good.
Ah, everyone says trade is good.
No, not everybody, but I see it.
You put any economist in the room and everybody says free trade is good, and you know...
That's fantastic. Mostly you say that you put two economists that have two different opinions.
But you know from the Uruguay round, from the Doha round...
No, the point is, okay, let's go to the core of it. An agreement is a good thing. The problem is, this agreement so far is look at something which is much more beneficial for the US than for the rest, and especially for Europe. The US already have an agreement with Pacific minus China. They want to have the same kind of agreement with Europe, and then they will be able to define the standards. And the biggest question in this story are standards. If you are able to define the standards as yours, then you're dominating the world. And that's what the US want to do, and I think the European should not be that naive.
Naive? The Europeans are going to get done over here, aren't they? I mean, France might keep its cultural exception.
Well, that cultural exception is a very interesting thing, and I'm totally in favor of that, but that's a small thing. Right. That's a small part of the business. The real part is not there.
Overall, the Europeans are going to get done over. The Americans are going to walk over the Europeans on this, aren't they?
We're going to see. We're going to see. I hope that the Europeans will be able to have a fair agreement with the US. And what I see today in the papers, in not only newspapers, but also documents which are circulating, is that it's absolutely unfair, and there's no reason why the European will accept it. The only point is that they're divided. United Europe will be able to resist. A divided Europe, and we'll come back to what we said before, will not be able to resist.
And you know well, as a politician of experience, divide and rule.
Exactly. But that's the reality of Europe. Europe could be one of the leaders of this world, not the only one of the leaders, if Europe was able to speak with one voice. It's absolutely not the case.
Finally, what are you going to do next? All right, you said you've got your consultancy and there's various other countries and you don't want to be president, but you are a man steeped in public service, and you're not about to just pack up and head off.
No, I spent all my life trying to help my people in France to have a better life. It appears to me, while I was working at the IMF, that I could do this at the global level. Again, I must be humble. I cannot change a lot of things, but I can help. And when I'm working for a country like South Sudan, for instance, which is a new republic, 18 months old, that needs everything, and that I'm doing it totally for free because I want to help them, I'm happy to see the government of South Sudan telling me, come to us and help us, we need you. That's much more rewarding than any kind of election in any country. People looking at you and saying, we need you.
Which is the opposite of people looking at you and saying, no, thank you.
Exactly. Exactly. But some people may have reason not to like me, and I totally respect that, and they don't want to see me anymore. I can respect that. The problem is there are on Earth a lot of people, right or wrong, but I think they're right, that wants me to help them. Why should I do that? And to do this, you just need to know what your advice are, and if people like it, and if it succeeds, then they will ask you more and more. And that's exactly what I want to do.
Dominic Strauss-Kahn.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.